Well, Michael, how do you feel?
So. Not terrible, but definitely not sick.
Is this your maiden voyage with COVID?
It's my maiden voyage, yes. Hopefully my only voyage. Have you had it?
Good, Michael.
No.
What, Miriam?
Knock on.
You sound good.
Yeah, the Paxlovid really definitely makes a difference. I gotta say.
What is?
The Paxlovid,
Oh, yeah.
Paxlovid, the thing that Biden took. And
You
I
have
took
the
it last
usual
night.
array of symptoms?
Yeah, it's well, the thing I was worried about was my breathing, and that's been fine. But I had a sore throat, headache, fever, aches, that kind of stuff. So
Not fun.
not fun, but better than some, which is very good.
No kidding. No shit.
So
My daughter had COVID right now and was in the emergency room 2 nights ago all night because it's affecting her heart.
that's really scary.
Wow.
It's really scary. And she's still having cardiac symptoms and they don't have a treatment for it. And it's just kind of.
So what does that mean? Like cardiac symptoms, like it's just irregular?
She'll be lying down, relaxing, and her heart rate will go up to 180, 170 beats per second.
Oh,
Whoa.
And it'll stay that way. And then it'll come down and then it'll go up again. And then it'll come down and then it'll and she can't predict when it's going to happen. And it's terrifying. And
Ugh.
this is what happens. COVID affects the heart for some people. And we don't know if it's going to be permanent or last for months.
Wait, is she at home with you?
She is not home with us right now. She lives with us,
Yeah.
but we sent her hither. She's in Connecticut now.
That's
So
good.
if she has to go to an emergency room, it'll be out of range for us.
Hey, God.
Terrible. It's just terrible.
I was talking to someone today who said that their husband and daughter had it during Christmas. And I was thinking, if nothing else, the fact that it's warm and you can have the windows open and be outside, and that we live in Shutesbury, are
Yeah.
all like, they're just phenomenal gifts.
Yeah.
There's like living
But
in
they've changed because of the surge now. Like if you are in the emergency room, they won't let you bring a family member in with you.
at all.
No. So you have to go in by yourself.
It's
Yeah.
well, the way we found out was we were down in Long Island helping out with Lucy's 96-year-old dad, and he got hospitalized, and then he got tested and turned out positive. So then they suggested everyone else, but Lucy found out because she went to visit him the next day, and his room had plastic over the doorway. So it's like it's intense stuff. So
It's like the plague.
anyway, we're here for another issue that the world is screwed up about. So, hi, everybody.
hi, yo.
Hello. I will call us to order at 7:03. And according to my minute taker rotation, Gail, you're up for minutes, and Graham, you're on deck. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Great. So Graham, next meeting you're on.
Next meeting, okay.
Yeah, you're forewarned. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. So we'll do our usual public comment, and there's only one public. Henry, you got any public comment before you talk later? Okay,
It's a lot of pressure on the public there.
I know, really. So we got minutes, and Leslie, did you get to do that? I didn't see the May 31st, so you're still
Yeah.
AWOL on those.
Yeah, no, I have not turned on my desktop. I'm recovering from Lyme, so I'm
Aye.
getting back up. I'm getting back up to speed, but I haven't not checked out the minutes. But it's on my mind. So hopefully by the next time,
Okay.
I will. I've seen plenty of great examples of minutes, so.
Well, I'm sorry it's on your mind, but I'm glad it's there, and hopefully you'll continue to recover too.
Yes, thank you.
So we got the July 12th minutes, which Nate did, and
Mhm.
have a motion to approve the minutes. And just to remind you, what we do is we move to approve and second, and then we discuss, and then we vote. So it sounds a little weird, but that's why we do it that way.
Okay,
So-
I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Leslie. Second,
Second,
thank you, Zoe. So any discussion about Nate's minutes?
I wasn't present, so I'll just vote. I'll just vote present on the vote.
Okay. good,
I
so-
read them. They're good minutes.
Cool, okay, we're hearing none, why don't we, we'll vote to approve them, so. Gail, how do you vote?
Hey,
Miriam,
Yes.
Leslie,
Yes,
Nate,
Yes.
Zoe,
aye.
and I'm an I, and Graham, you're abstaining.
Present.
Okay, cool. Thank you all. Cruising through. So we got a bunch of sort of updates and continuing items. The the first one was a few of us went to the select board meeting. I think it was like 2 weeks ago at this point, hard to keep track. And among other things, Nate presented about community choice aggregation, which I thought was a great presentation. So Nate, thanks for pulling that together. And it seemed well received. Do you want to share your thoughts on the presentation, select board, et cetera?
Yeah, I think my takeaway was that, as you say, I thought it was fairly well received, but certainly they were interested in having some time to kind of think about it, maybe review some of the supplementary materials, do their own research. And we, especially for those who were not there, they were not in a position to give us like a complete green light, but I think did register a sense that we were headed in the right direction. So it, I was a little unsure exactly how that line is drawn with regards to future action, but it seemed to me like we were probably in a position to maybe start working on some materials like FAQs, things of that nature that might support broader community outreach, but we are not yet at a point to schedule such community outreach. But I'll absolutely step back and see how others perceived the reaction, and then maybe we'll have like a complete picture filled out that way.
Cool. Gail, you were there. Graham, were you there too, right? Go for it. Graham,
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I thought the select board actually is very interested. I think the only reason they hedged, they were going to vote, and then because they're I think they're gun shy from looking like they've endorsed something that is totally new, and so I think that when comfort level and a little more gets bounced around, I think they're more likely to take a positive position or just endorse it. So that was my thought.
great. Any other thoughts? Gail?
I could report on the discussion at the select board this evening.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Rita was not there, so the meeting was, the select board representation was Melissa and Eric only. They're clearly for it as a concept, but they had several questions. One right off the bat was, where and how are the various options defined? So they referred to the basic stance, some green, lots of green, green only with no forest, so who makes those decisions and where? And I said I would come back to the committee and ask Nate to check in with our consultant. Are we calling him anything these days? to get an answer to that. Melissa asked a very pointed question. That is, will the vendors, the new vendors, accept the fuel assistance program that National Grid now accepts? And my response was that that would be a question we would have to put to vendors as part of our FAQ or a search with the different vendors. I mean, that's a yes, no answer. Would you accept the fuel assistance program as it is now? Understand, either they do or they don't. That seems straightforward. The question though came up of what the ECAC would recommend in terms of various options, and they really wanted to caution us not to limit unduly the various options. So they took some issue with the support solar, but without expense of forest land that was in the recommendations in the slideshow, as if that meant they would not, we, the town or whoever, would not accept any vendor that had solar that took down agricultural land or forest land or whatever. So I asked them if it would be fair to address that as an issue of the land use supporting solar, to get it away from what they kept calling industrial solar. And I think my interpretation is their remarks are aimed at AMP and others. And they made some remarks about local. I said, no, the vendors we go to are not going to be local. Wind power, for instance, will come out of Oklahoma. We're not talking about, are we going to subsidize or encourage the town to subsidize? I couldn't say all that, but that was the subtext in my hearing, that they were afraid the committee was going to come down strongly against AMP. And I tried to make the point that without mentioning AMP, that local solar installations had nothing to do with our community choice of aggregation, that the vendors would be sought nationally, and that, but I would inquire and bring it back to this committee as to how narrow or how limiting the recommendations might be from this committee to the select board and to the town.
Graham.
If the town had an option that said wind power, then AMP AMP might have wind power somewhere. They might end up selling it that way, but we wouldn't be getting power from AMP. It's not like our committee has any position or any jurisdiction over what AMP does anywhere.
Right.
We might buy from them or we might not, but the energy broker would be the person who was outlining the possibilities of what we can buy.
Broker, that's the word I wanted and did not have at hand. Yep.
Yeah, and it seems like, I know Nate, you were going to jump in, but it seems like there's 2 points in between the production. So it's consumer choice, number one. So the consumer's deciding. So we, only our recommendation is what are the buckets of options, but the consumer gets to choose. So it doesn't, all our only influence is by saying we're going to have these 3 or 4 buckets of options, but we're not forcing anyone. And then I think the other part is that the broker, and Nate, you should correct me if I'm wrong, the broker then goes out to a market with those parameters. So the town has no role in this at all. We're sort of like a blind trust in that regard. And sort of saying, we want you to produce electricity with these parameters, go find someone who does it. But we're not saying pick these people. Is that correct?
That's my understanding too.
Yeah.
The select board's point was who and at what point are those buckets defined and limited?
Yeah. Well, I think that would be us. I mean, they get to decide, the select board, but I think we would make a
The select board or the
recommendation.
town?
I think it's us ECAC making a recommendation on the buckets and then having the select board approve it because it's got to go on the warrant. So whatever the warrant, is put together, I mean, or the contract, maybe it's not even the warrant, it's just the contract. It's after the warrant. So it strikes me, getting back to sort of Nate, you're like, how do we draw a line between that discussion and the next step? It seems like we have to do another round of education on like with the select board. I mean, it seems like that was sort of the
Yes.
first introduction over their
Yes.
bow. But now that they're paying attention to it, and maybe we can combine it with education at which time we want you to actually make a decision. Because the thing that I took away was we shouldn't, the point that I think I made at that meeting was we need to plan if we want to have a public education session that's available to everybody.
Right.
And in order to plan, you have to get an okay that, we can do an FAQ and a fact sheet and stuff, but I wouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of
Right.
either putting our own energy out or people getting a whiff that we're doing it before the select board says we should. So I think they have to make a decision. Yeah.
Could we have the broker come to a select board meeting and answer those kinds of questions? Nate, the fellow you've been talking with, would that,
Yes, we could get, that was Colonial, I believe.
yeah,
But is it, I'm sorry, go ahead, go.
Yeah, how about as an alternative to that, rather than have a meeting with a lot of just ask the broker, what are 5 examples of options that we could, or 6 options, and then the select board can help us choose which are acceptable options. I mean, I don't think we want to offer more than 3 options. So therefore, what are the sorts of, because that's all the select board wants to know is, number 1, what are the possible choices? And 2, where is their part in reviewing this whole thing before it goes through? Because otherwise we start educating, or we start, having conversations that are just kind of like, blue sky. How about that as choosing 6 things that are possible?
I have 2 questions, I guess, Nate, and then you should jump in. One is, we have a choice of brokers. Like we haven't settled on Colonial, right? I mean, Colonial does most of the Franklin County ones, but I think that's something that we would recommend. So we could talk to a broker, but it wouldn't be the official person that we're contracting with yet. And then I guess the other question is, I know Nate, it was recommended we shouldn't have more than 3, but I mean, if we had 4 options, it's not going to make the sky fall down, right? And if it appeases people, it might be more practical to have 4. Because it seems like the logical first 2 are cheaper, like everyone's going to have a cheaper option, and everyone's going to have a green option. So it's the third one that's controversial. And if you can sort of like create some less controversy in there, maybe that's beneficial. But
Yeah, that does sound right to me. And of course, a 4th option is always, or 5th in this case, is always just sticking with National Grid or Eversource, what their default mix is. I think just in terms of the timing for establishing what those options are, I think because you're using the broker to go out to set up a contract with prices, and given that those prices are constantly fluctuating, right? So you've got this line that's going up and down, and then you're just trying to like lock it in place for a year through this bidding process. I think that the mix and the price points are probably fixed pretty close to the time when you're wanting to present it to the board and then ink the contract. So it actually may be necessary to frame it for the select board and the town with a little more wiggle room around the edges. But I would very much like to get better information, because I do have questions about the degree to which you can specify solar that's on reclaimed land, for example. What level of detail can you approach in specifying the sources of the electricity? I do want to dig into that just to make sure that we're presenting stuff that we can really deliver on. But
Miriam?
Did we ever clarify, maybe we didn't, I'm just not remembering, what happens for people who are net metering because they have solar? Are they excluded from the buying club?
It's continued.
So what, so you're allowed to be in the aggregate
Yes.
program?
Yes.
So, because, you know, what rate you choose then has an implication for, you know, the net metering, right? How much of a credit you're getting. It just, whatever it is, will just carry over into the net metering. Wow. So basically, if you have solar, you'd be getting maybe more bang for your buck. Your solar buck.
Yeah.
Or would be a wash. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand that.
Well, how about this is a recommendation? I mean, Nate, if you want to do a little digging, it seems like a communication via email back to the select board in response to some of their inquiries that Gail raised would be helpful. And I'm happy to sort of write it. And then I think I would run it by Gail, since you were there hearing the questions, and Nate, because you're a resident expert at this point, just to make sure that like we're capturing stuff. And, you know, I think we do want to eventually go back to them because we need them to make a decision. But I think in the interim, we can respond to their questions. And then I was trying to figure out like if we should ask for a meeting in early September, like after the summer's over, for, you know, another presentation / questions, if that would make sense. So is that, Leslie? Yeah.
And I'm curious what would happen with me because I have community solar. So would I stay with that or would I have to move
Your
or?
choice.
Okay.
I think what's interesting about this is like the American way. It's like, you know, consumer choice. You know, it seems like it's just upside, but I think it's a matter of educating people that, you know, it is upside. No one's getting locked into something that they don't want. So does that sound like a plan, Nate? If you want to do a little research, and then I'll try to write something up, and you and Gail can be my eyes. Yeah.
Michael, when you say a later presentation sometime in the summer, early fall, by whom to whom?
I'm thinking it would be us going back to select board and basically figure we can basically make ourselves available to them, you know, basically. I think it's to say, we're coming to you because we talked about it in July. You know, you've been thinking about it. We need to make a decision one way or the other. So be prepared just to answer their questions and get them to the point of comfort where they can decide one way or the other. So I don't think we have to have a PowerPoint necessarily. I think we just have to be able to, you know, say, we gave you a presentation, we answered your questions, and we're here now because we'd like to move it forward. So what else?
You
do
need
you
your
need?
vote, yeah.
Yeah.
Nate, could you find out from Colonial where in the process the buckets are defined and how much the town, as opposed to the SB, has a voice in that?
yes,
In other
yeah.
words, Will
that's a
the
key
town be
question.
voting on the buckets? Or is that then an SB approval of the buckets already defined?
Town votes on moving forward with community choice aggregation,
Right,
broadly speaking,
right.
but the buckets, they do get defined later. But I think getting really specific about that part of the timeline is important. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So Nate, you'll ask them what sort of options typical towns like us do, right? I mean, that it'll be the categories of what we can propose. Is that what you? I think you're empowered at this point to go and talk to any broker who will talk to you, as long as they understand that you can't commit, and they sound like they understand that.
But what are real world options? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So being that some of us are war torn, in the town of Shutesbury. It just sort of strikes me what I think the point of contention will be is that if it comes up for a vote for a warrant article to approve going forward, there's going to be someone who says, I can't vote for this without knowing what's in it. Like what are the buckets? It's a nice concept. I support the concept, but I need the detail before I can vote. So it just sort of, from this conversation, I think we just have to be prepared.
Do you mean the select board or the whole town?
The town.
Oh,
The town. At the point where we would have, we would be well advised to say what the thing is
Right.
when we're asking them to vote, and we could get there if the select boards. We'll have a program at that point that we're trying to offer the town.
Though I think, what you're saying, Graham, it's interesting because it might be a certain set of steps that Nate finds out from the broker of the buckets get defined farther down the road. But for a political reason and a vote reason, we might want to have the buckets established at the beginning when we're asking the town to approve the concept of community choice aggregation, even though in reality, a broker will say, you don't have to deal with that for months. For us, we might have to. For us, given that what we've been through, we might have to. So it's worth just raising and being aware of, I think.
What about having public hearings to help flesh out which buckets people want? So we can say, we had public hearings and this is the feedback we got.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I was thinking about the home energy survey was really interesting in terms of, finding out where people are at. So I think that's a good, it's a good validator and supporter. So would you suggest doing it before the warrant article or after? Like after the town vote or?
Well, yeah, you could do it before because that also is gonna spread the word about it,
Yep.
get people interested. And the good thing is, if it's at a town meeting vote, we're not voting to take anything away that people have currently. So nobody's losing anything. It just means some people have the option of gaining something.
Yeah, right.
So I
Right.
think that's the takeaway that people are gonna be anxious about is that, if you vote for it, you don't have to be a subject of it.
Right. Nate?
Yeah, I totally agree with Miriam, and it makes sense to me to, do the outreach in advance of a warrant article to, to answer questions and just because there are simple ways of presenting it, but if you start getting into class 1 SRECs and that there are risks of getting too technical, which I was starting to fall into for sure. So I think this goes straight to our science communication talk later in this meeting, right? Like how to frame this and present it to folks so that it's clear. But it makes sense to me to do some of the groundwork before the vote so people aren't surprised and they kind of know what they're getting into and being asked to vote on.
Cool. Okie dokie. Well, we have a short-term and a long-term plan, I think. So Nate, you'll go information gather and then I'll collect stuff and right back to the select board. And then I think the plan will be to ask the select board time on the agenda in early September. And if they're good with that, then we can start going forward with the public outreach, the equivalent of hearings, et cetera, et cetera. Does that sound about right? Awesome. Oh, Henry, sorry.
Just a quick comment. A question. The survey that was done, I don't believe it was a representative sample of the town, is it? It was basically opportunistic, right? Whoever responded is counted. And so, yeah, it could be a fair amount of self-selection there. People who are interested in the topic, who've already committed to this. So
Yeah.
So
It'll
it
always
does-
be though, like going to the hearing, the same thing, like whoever's gonna come and share their opinion is gonna have a strong opinion.
But, yeah, but all I'm saying is that that would support the idea of reaching out and educating people, informing people, engaging them before.
Okay,
The survey didn't mention aggregation, did it specifically, Gail? I don't think so.
no.
It's-
No, but several folks did ask for meetings, panels, outreach with information on energy sources and such. So,
So I'm gonna move us on to the other part of the select board meeting, which is the ARPA funds. And there's a bit of, so we went into that meeting where they didn't really address any of our recommendations because we didn't have dollar amounts. And at the meeting, the only dollar amount that we had to share was Miriam's, I don't even know if it was back in the envelope estimate of $50,000 to $75,000 for stormwater management engineering survey. That was the only amount that we had. Subsequent to that meeting, I think I emailed everybody a couple of days ago that last week, Becky told us that we didn't get our MVP action grant, where we were trying to get some of the stormwater issues addressed. So there's no money currently in the pipeline for stormwater management. And then the other thing is Graham and Gail and I had a little back and forth about trying to get pricing on the smaller municipal solar projects. And I did reach out to Marianne Connor to see if she could identify a solar vendor. So she talked to PV Squared. And what they said is it's roughly, it's a thing called a first level assessment, which includes evaluating the roof and the carrying capacity, looking at the lease, looking at the interconnections, smart solar incentives, some additional modeling. And so they were saying it's $2,000 per site. So, you know, if you looked at the highway department, the future library, town hall, et cetera, you know, it gives us a sense. I think there's 5 or 6, depending on how much we want to do, but that's the only other number that we've got.
each of those buildings is a site?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I gave her the list. I said, you know, what we've discussed in these meetings was, you know, maybe the new library, maybe the highway department, maybe, you know, I know the school is not a particularly good candidate, but the school is municipally owned, extending town hall, I think Graham had talked about. The fire department, I think that's the totality of the town buildings that we identified. So they said roughly $2,000, which for this first level assessment. So you know, the question I have is, do we want to go back to them both, either because there's now we know there's no stormwater money coming at all, and just say, yes, we really do want some money for an engineering study for stormwater. If we wanted to go with the PV Squared estimate, we can say, you know, $10,000 or $12,000 for the first level assessment for the municipal solar. And the only other question I had, because I don't think we're not going to do the update of the master plan anytime soon, but the grant writing, you know, in terms of the upcoming grants that you were thinking about with Green Community Scale, if we wanted to tap someone, you know, this would be the time to sort of see if we get something put in a kitty. And I see Miriam, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking, sorry, I was flossing my teeth, so.
They look very pretty.
Thank you. So I was just thinking, you know, Becky knows a lot about some of these issues. Would it make sense, Michael, for you to sit down with her or have a meeting with her and maybe find out her thoughts about it? There was a program, and I'm just can't remember the name of it. It was for roads, and I want to call it, is it Safe Streets or City
Complete Streets.
What?
Complete Streets.
Complete Streets, right, where they're the town started participating in the process, but they haven't really gone through the whole thing.
Where you had a, yeah, that was, you had to go through several hoops and develop a policy, et cetera, which I ended up doing
Yeah,
for the select board like 2 years ago. And the whole idea is it's non-motor vehicle transit, so pedestrian bikes, et cetera, and things to facilitate those. So that's one of the grant opportunities that I think we would definitely be considering down the road.
maybe that isn't what I was thinking about. Or maybe there was some part of that had to do with assessments of roads and streets.
Yeah, it was
Going
part of
over.
that DOE webinar I went to and reported on.
Yeah, and I remember looking up to see whether we had participated in it as a town. I saw that they had these charts of like towns and whether they did an assessment and whether they had a plan, and
Right.
it looked like the town had started the process but then never completed it to the assessment phase. So I could try to figure out where I saw that table and send it to you, but I thought, Becky knows the backstory of what the highway department was gonna do or didn't do.
Yeah.
And
So-
that would be the, and even like for an engineering study, like how much, I'm sure Becky has looked at that before, so she probably has a better idea.
Yeah.
There was an engineering study down around Lake Wyola years ago, and it was proposed and dropped because why? It was too expensive or too, yeah.
Now they're applying for another grant to do another engineering study, but the grant
Oh,
application
Lake
deadline
Wyola is,
for Lake
Yeah.
Wyola, that's only for Lake Wyola, it's not for the town as a whole. It's a planning grant. It was gonna be through DEP planning grant, 604 or
Yeah,
Three-
the one that was dropped was the guy who was spearheading it, I think left town. So, and it was sort of the first step, because
Oh.
the actual work was too expensive, so it was just an assessment. And then he left.
That was just, it was only looking at one side of Lake Wyola, and it wasn't really, it was through DCR. The DCR civil engineer did like I have a copy of it if you guys want to see it. It was a very general recommendations, not really complete engineering plans, but be kind of looking at the whole town rather than just Lake Wyola. And that report was really looking mostly at private roads, which doesn't really get us anywhere for the town.
Yeah. Well, I could check in with Becky and say, we still have priorities of wanting to do some stormwater management assessment. We want to look at the smaller mini solar, and we'd like to look into grant writing assistance so that we can maximize the opportunities, and see what she thinks. Depending on where she's coming from, she'll either give us a green light or not. But I guess the question is, do we want Becky to sort of be she does have knowledge about this stuff, but we're our own committee. So if we want to have our voice and say, this is what we think is important.
We need information from her, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
go back to PV Square. So you said the first level assessment, what would that involve? And what would their assignment be?
So what they wrote for the first level assessment, it includes the carrying capacity of the roof given its age, determining if it could be insured or not.
School of flunk.
Then the roof's capacity to generate solar, how much sun it generally receives throughout the year, what the lease arrangement would be and what the cost would be, what would be the interconnection agreement with the utility cost, what's the potential for smart solar incentives and additional adder incentives like batteries, et cetera.
So storage is part of that?
You get a storage, you get an adder for that, for the smart
it's all-
program. And then they do a basic design of some first level financing modeling. And they figure out if it's financially viable. So,
But it's all roof focused?
well, yeah, and I specifically said we also want to ground mount it. So
Yeah.
it was either a miscommunication, but my sense is some of this stuff they could do whether it's on a roof or not. I mean, they still have to look at the interconnectivity and the viability and that kind of stuff, but I don't know if that makes
Those numbers
ground
are,
mount.
those numbers are tight enough to take to the select board for a request for ARPA funding.
Yeah, I mean, if we assume 5 locations, whether they're on a building or next to a building, that would be 10 grand. If, I think there's probably some other town-owned land that we could consider if we wanted to, but, so I think, that's a decent number,
Yep.
to go forward. I think the stormwater one is, the level of funding is much greater. So, Graham.
Yeah, I think they're off. I think they talk about roof mounted because that's the one that's got some complexity to it. And, is it a good roof? Can you, I think their assumption is probably if you've got space and land, if there's space to put it on the ground, then it's like you hardly need them.
Huh.
Yeah, that's and as for storage component, well, you can only store as much as you can generate. So even a proposal for storage is a fairly trivial derivative of, if you have a big system, you can have a big storage. If you have a little, I mean, it's all just scales. So
Yeah.
So yeah, I wonder, you could ask them if we know we have, if we're not talking roofs, then is it cheaper? Will they come for $1,000 and look at it?
Yeah.
You just gotta do the tie-in then, and that's just a question of, is it such a large system that you're proposing? Does it need 3-phase power? Most of our systems are under 20 kilowatts, and they're fine with the single phase. So.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when I asked for this stuff, I made it clear to both Mary Ann and passed it on that we were looking for information. We weren't making any commitment or any preference in terms of either PV squared or co-op power. And I asked Mary Ann to do it as a Shutesbury resident, even though she has professional connections in this regard. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that I should talk to Becky and get a sense of what she knows, so we can come up with a figure for the stormwater figure. It sounds like the solar is within the realm of reason. And do we want to let go, or do we want to sort of push ahead with some money for grant writing? Gail, you've been thinking about it the most. If we got 2 grant opportunities, I mean, we could all chip in, but if we could pay someone a little bit of money to help us, you think it's worth having that?
I think there's a political question here, and who would be authorized by the town or the select board to do the grant writing? Grants written before have been by only 1 or 2 named individuals.
What do you mean? Well, it's always been volunteers, except for unless it's the town administrator or something like that. Right?
Becky wrote
Is that
all
what
the
you're saying?
grants. Becky wrote all the grants for the earlier energy committee, right?
Well, I wrote the MVP grant and I wrote the complete streets. So I know, at least from my personal experience. And then,
Excellent.
and then
Okay.
I did another one a few years ago, which it was.
What do you charge, Michael?
So, I mean, I think that the issue is, I don't think we've ever paid anyone to write a grant, is more the issue. Like, it's either town staff or town volunteers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's investment in, it's always a risk. But if we had someone who was more savvy in some of this stuff, and and I'm assuming, if Maura Healy becomes governor, somewhere in the next year, there's going to be more opportunities for this stuff because she's oriented. So we might find ourselves with grants that we just don't have the capacity to apply for because we don't have.
Is there a way to find out who wrote the grants that were successful in neighboring towns?
Who wrote them?
Yeah.
I think conceivably, but it's probably a lot of legwork. I think you'd have to figure out who succeeded in what towns and then call them up. So it's a bit of a chore. But if we wanted, I mean, if we had a particular grant program, yeah, you know, like using MVP as an example. There's a public list of towns who got MVP action
Right.
grants. And so you could call up and say, you know, just say
Who wrote-
Leverett got it. Call up Leverett and say, hey, who wrote your grant?
Wrote your grant, yeah.
Right, so, yeah. And one of the things I just forgot to mention, but part of what I pitched to the select board when we had this conversation was just having this climate response fund, you know, and they put money in it so that it's there and available. You know, so we're not expending it unless we actually have a need. But it gives us the flexibility. So that's what I was sort of pitching it that way. And there was some conversation. I would say they weren't head over heels over the idea because we didn't have much specifics, but that's another way to do it, just sort of fund something into that. But how about I'll talk to Becky and I'll just see what she has to say about all three of these things, and I'll report back next meeting. We'll go from there rather than beat it into the ground. So let's see. So I think I'm just going to flip the energy insight and the liaison. So Gail, you want to just give an update about the Mass Energy Insight access that you've been working on?
Yes, so I wrote the regional coordinator to see how you get access to Mass Energy Insight, which is the database that's completed by electric companies and input from our town on fuel use. And it turns out it's very simple. You get the select board or the town administrator to ask make a request. So I wrote a letter to the select board and said, according to the form, please make us all have access to the Mass Energy Insight. And that letter was approved this evening at the meeting, at the select board meeting. And we should hear shortly. Which means any of us would have access to read only all the reports, all the data reports going back, way back. I mean, it's got history, it's got all kinds of good stuff.
Cool. Can you, once that happens, you just send us, there's a link presumably to log in? Or how do we?
Yeah.
So the select board would get that and then pass it along, is that how it works?
The select board has, Rita has selected, has authorized each of us to be given access. And
Cool.
we would then be granted by the ECAC email, we would be given,
Oh.
I presume, we would be given a login and password, each of us individually, that we could use each of us individually for read-only access.
Cool.
And there's apparently a user's guide on the website, how to get to what you want to get to and what to do with it when you get it.
Cool. Well, thank you for taking the lead on that. It'd be interesting to see what we can see when we get there. And so the last thing on the updates is the spreadsheet that last time we met, you know, Nate had created this spreadsheet based on the MVP and the hazard mitigation plan items that were relevant to energy and climate. And then I said I was going to update it a little bit, and then Gail add an open space. So it's a Google sheet that's on the Google Drive. And I assume I'm looking at the most recent one because it's live on Google Drive. And so what I wanted everyone to do is there's different, for each of these actually, let me see, I'm going to share the screen. It'll be easier that way. Can you all see that?
Nope, not yet. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So the column A are all the, I'll try to make it a smidge bigger if I can. Might be helpful. So column A are all the activities that got pulled out that are energy or climate related. And then column B is the source. So HMP is the hazard mitigation, MVP is the spacing. What's MVP? I got COVID brain. Anyway,
Municipal.
thank you. Vulnerability preparedness.
Vulnerability, yeah.
Thank you. It was the first, I couldn't get the M. I was like, what's that M? So that's the source. And then it got based on in the report, it's either higher or low or moderate priority. But the key part for us is if you cruise over a little bit, you'll see the responsible department. So, and then what the yellow is our ECAC liaison. So for example, looking at the third one, which is explore alternative measures for addressing extreme heat conditions at the elementary school. So assess feasibility of planning for school closures and remote learning on extreme temperature days. So that's something from hazard mitigation plan. The responsible department is the school committee. And Nate raised his hand to say that he'd be the liaison to the school committee. So since part of our charge is to sort of follow up on all of these things and try to make them happen, the way I was envisioning it, and I think in talking to Nate, he was in agreement that he would arrange to go to a school committee meeting sometime in the near future and say, hey, school committee, you're probably not aware of this, but this issue got raised in the hazard mitigation plan. And we're the Energy and Climate Action Committee, and we're bringing it to your attention. We'd like to help facilitate you thinking about this and making progress on this thing. And what do you need to move forward on the issue? So basically raising the awareness that this thing exists for whatever the appropriate committee is, and then literally just be the liaison between us, whose charge it is, but it's really their responsibility. And the premise in my mind is that the 7 of us cannot do this work for the town. Like there's just too much, there's too much to do. And so the idea is to engage all the different committees, one for the things that are identified in these 2 reports, but also I think just to seed their thinking to say, hey, how do we start thinking about energy and climate and all that we do? You know, so going into the budget cycle this year, maybe there's something they'll think about or whatever it is. So looking at this as I scroll down, I think right now it's Gail and Nate and I who are sort of signed up. So what I wanted to do is ask if you guys before the next meeting would just go through and see. And I know Miriam, you said you would do the Concom. You just didn't put it in here somewhere. But I do remember you said you would do that. So that's
Which
cool.
one is that? Which is moving around? I can't see which one.
There's number 5 is like some of these have multiple committees. So like
Yeah.
number 5 is
I'll do number 5. And it sort of feels like maybe number 7 is kind of a shared, maybe you and I sharing that one, Michael, because there's, land use regulation. Yeah.
happy to.
Okay.
I like sharing. I went to kindergarten.
Michael,
Yeah,
the notes there that you see open space plan colon, I simply went to the open space plan grid of like this and plugged in who was cited as the responsible committee in the open space plan. It overlaps considerably, of course,
Yeah.
with what was in the MVP or the HV.
cool. And Graham,
Yeah, you can put me in for the tree management thing because I'm already always looking at the trees that might fall on the
okay.
fiber optic cables. So,
What number is that so I can go there?
it was a little ways down, right?
5.
Trees.
Freeze.
Develop.
Isn't that
I think
number
it started
5?
with the word develop, maybe.
I thought it was number
And maintain areas. No,
there.
yeah. So no, I'm
number
wrong.
5, Michael.
5.
Right. Yeah.
That was
Okay.
the one I.
Thank
You
you.
have to fight over it.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we, well, you're already suggesting, but really, maybe we could get Don Walkluck to kind of come to one of our meetings and talk about this, because he's really got his finger on all of this in a way that, none of us do.
On the trees specifically.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. See, but I think what I would I don't think that's a bad idea down the road. I think would be great is if we reach out to them. In this case, Don's just a 1-person committee, for lack of a better thing, but sort of whoever's tagged, just have a conversation with them and talk about it. And then if it makes sense to come back to us
Yeah.
for a bigger discussion, but
Well, I'm always talking, I mean, I'm in contact with the highway department and Don frequently around all sorts of stuff, so.
Okay,
I'm happy to reach out to both of them.
okay.
There was one near the bottom too that had,
I was interested in being the liaison for, I think, the last one, which was the Shutesbury Library Building Committee.
Okay. Great. Cool. And there
They're
was,
looking for volunteers right now to be on that library building committee if you want to volunteer.
Oh,
and 21 is the trees.
21 is the trees. So that's a Graham one, right?
Well,
This is about utility lines and stuff.
yeah, I mean, Graham, we get notified, the Concom gets notified about those tree maintenance plans. I have the 5-year National Grid plan.
Oh, okay.
So
They
Miriam, do you want to
notify-
do that?
Ah,
Or do, you guys could
Yeah,
fight
I
over who
think-
does trees.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, there's an overlap. I mean, we can, maybe Graham and I can coordinate with each other. and
Yeah,
figure out what we're
I
gonna
would
do.
say just, why don't we all just look at I'll send out the link again, just look at it and then we can finalize it next time we meet. You know, and I'll add a little column here. So if there's comments about, you know, 2 people want to do it, you can put in the reason why. Nate, you're so polite raising your hand.
Yeah, I was thinking about the prioritization that is like emerged from the processes that generated these documents. And then also looking at our charge from the select board, which includes a role for this committee to, it seems like on my reading, further prioritize some of these actions, to make recommendations for what we should be pushing on harder, or maybe less, or doing first and then maybe doing other things later. So as we were signing up for these liaison roles, it would help me, I think, maybe at our next meeting, once we've sort of gelled on which groups we want to do outreach with, we sort of address that question, right? Because there's the priority that emerged from the documents and the processes that sort of gelled those recommendations, but then it seems like there's a role for the committee to further deliberate what to push, and with what level of enthusiasm as well. So
Yeah. I think
just to have that space for deliberation and kind of talking about what ought to be the priorities, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, rather than just sending us off in different directions, finding, getting some guidance from this committee about how we want to be advocating.
I think that makes sense. So we can do that next time.
Yeah.
And I think, if you go through and figure out like what committee you would like to be liaison for, it's just a good excuse to sort of look at this list again and get a sense, and then we can discuss it. Leslie?
Yeah, and I also am interested in working with Don on trees, and also working with the library on natural building materials. So, again, it depends on what's happening when. And
Okay. Well, why don't we I think we can follow up on Nate's suggestion and sort of figure out, what rises to the top. It very well might be that I was thinking that if we sort of fanned out, different committees could be doing things at the same time. So, it's not a sequential kind of thing where we don't have a bottleneck.
Right.
But there are only 7 of us. And so we don't want to be going to this meeting and then 2 or 3 other meetings to do that stuff. So we're going to have to prioritize where we show up. So I think that makes sense. So I think this is good for now. Graham.
Yeah, you could put me in for the, I think it was the very top one, the emergency communication thing, because I've
Oh.
often thought about what does happen when the internet goes down. I believe that that if the internet went down, or the connection to the town, that we could that we could communicate still just using the fiber to every home. Now, if everyone loses their power, well, then some people have emergency power and some people don't. Some people have some batteries. So, you know, I think the question there asked, what does the town do when we lose power? Is like, you know, you could communicate via smoke signals, but there's not much you could, you know, you could run some message sticks around. I think people will need to kind of coordinate with their neighbors at the point where some people have power and many people don't.
Yeah, and some of this, I think, really does sit in more heavily in other committees versus, you know, like emergency management, that's their whole task. So we can contribute sort of an energy and climate lens to it, but really that's what they're supposed to be struggling with all the time. Whereas, you know, the school committee, they're not about energy and climate, they're about educating kids, and they should be incorporating energy and climate into their operations. So depending on the, you know, the department or committee, it might look differently. But cool. So I'll put this on the agenda for next time to talk about prioritization, and then you all can just go visit that if you want. So I think, let's see, where are we at? Oh, we're almost on time. We can do I put the community solar on just the agenda because in the Graham and Gail and I conversation about the pricing, I just wanted to, maybe we don't have to talk about this today, and that's totally cool. I mostly want to just confirm like what we've been discussing for not big community solar, like the follow up with Marianne, because she's still at Marianne Connor, because she still has to get back to us.
Guys, I got to deal with my daughter. She's
Oh.
I gotta go.
Okay, bye.
Sorry.
That's all
Thinking
right.
of you. Take good care, Marianne.
Oh, that's hard.
Mm.
God. So this is, I don't want to talk about the Marianne stuff because she has to get back to us, but just in terms of the small site focused municipal solar, we're on the same page that we're thinking about, like, okay, if we have available town-owned land or town-owned building, that we might explore how to put solar there and generate electricity on those sites. Is that essentially what we've been thinking about? Yeah.
I think the first one would be there's a couple of places where it looks very feasible just to extend a few more onto what's already there.
Like town hall.
Yeah, like town hall, like the fire department. And you would have to obviously talk to the fire department whether it's going to be in their way or what their thoughts are. But yeah, I think there are some pretty obvious choices or easy choices on it.
Okay, yeah. And Gail, did you have any thoughts? Okay, yeah, I mostly, you know, this is not a long conversation because I think we can carve it out for another time about how we move that forward. It was mostly just a ground truth thing to make sure that what I was thinking was the correct thing. So that's helpful. So Henry, you're on for the grand finale of the meeting.
Howdy. Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the communication strategy piece that I worked up.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, I want to give you context. You know, I mean, there's a context for all these things. People have thought about them, particularly question of climate, or rather global warming, if we want to be more precise, and energy. There are challenges, yes, because a lot of this is still being sorted out in a sense. And the reason for that, I guess, is, again, the reason that explains why we even have any research in this kind of area of pro-social communication. A lot of it was done in the 60s and 70s in the third world back in the day. And the money was there basically to ward off communism, you know. Cold War's over, has been for a long time. So money hasn't been used much, state money. but there have been campaigns around tobacco big time and HIV/AIDS, for instance. So there are some lessons as I try to bring up there, and they're actually quite good lessons, takeaways from what people have learned in the field. One of my mentors actually contributed to that National Academies document that you read, and it has a lot of his insight and shared insights really in the field of communication. So it'll be brief, and I want to get questions. Essentially, this has become a controversial point of reference, that then this question of so-called climate change, global warming, and it has influenced people's perception, the public's perception, in a way that they do acknowledge that it exists. Over 70% of the population acknowledges this is quite good, because it used to be 50% or less. But when it comes to the fact that it is human caused, that there are real issues there. It gets smaller and smaller, and then the smallest proportion of people, of course, are the ones who are willing to do something about it. Let's put resources into this and do something about climate change. And of course, by implication, energy use, yes, and various strategies to reduce fossil fuel consumption. So that's really, in a nutshell, that's the challenge of it. We still have people who are gonna think, well, it's climate change is a part of a natural process. After all, there was an ice age, and yeah, but there are opportunities there, particularly as I highlight, opportunities for self-interest in regards to the costs. People are very sensitive to costs. We live in a society where, I'd say the majority of Americans are, have been pauperized, to use a term, over the last 30 years. And they're less willing to give up in the economic sphere. Taxes is just not a good thing for people. They can't afford to pay for basic services. But in that context, cheaper energy, the fact that, so-called green energy, green jobs, etc., these are all things that have economic value, even for those who deny the climate change or who reference that. But in effect, any kind of communication around energy or inevitably is going to reach back into this controversy and the doubts that have been created largely by the fossil fuel industry and right-wing think tanks, right? And the media that has not been very good at communicating this until very recently, really. And one last thing I would say, I think you have an opportunity. You did a survey. You've got people, 20% of the population here, who, how should we say, they're committed at some level, and those are people that could help to build on, right? So those are people who have networks themselves. They can influence other people. Yeah. So question is how can you use those people as part of a communication strategy? And you can also think of it as building on those people, because it could have phases where you recruit people, you enlist them into this through the example of those who go for it first, early adopters, So there are many angles on it here, but it requires creative thinking, dialogue among yourselves, and maybe be happy to participate if you like. But there are opportunities, I think, in spite of the overall tone of the National Academy's piece, which is that, we really don't know that much about this stuff. Well, yeah, the research is largely disconnected, and very little has been done to integrate it. But there are things we can bank on. And certainly the advertising industry has made a lot of money off of this kind of research, So there are some certainties there. Anyway, I'll stop there and open it up to any questions you might have based on what I think.
Cool. Anyone have any questions? Zoe?
Well, what this conversation is bringing up for me is just a curiosity to hear from everybody in the group about moments or media or books that have been hugely influential for them in kind of fueling a fire within them to come to this meeting and do all this work. And looking at that, maybe getting some insight into what's effective, and also just wanting to consume those things myself.
Any takers?
Good books.
Well, I could certainly recommend a few books and articles that offer some insights, practical insights on that. Yeah.
Nate, you
Well,
want
the
to jump in?
question. And I, not to start a book club, but I think it would be really useful to sort of, by email or maybe put together some of our most influential essays, or I know just recently I read David Wallace Wells' The Uninhabitable Earth, and the perspective of that book is just to sound a very loud alarm. So the strategic point from a communications perspective of that book is to highlight borderline worst case scenarios for warming. And I think, appealing to or going straight for the amygdala is one strategy that, for some people, depending upon where you are, can be very motivating. But it can also be demotivating for people. And, I understand that a lot of folks, particularly younger folks, are just looking at the future and wondering, what's the point, if you will, or are concerned and maybe have the perspective that there's sort of a foregone conclusion that we've committed to a certain path. So it would be interesting to hear an interview with Wells, addressing that sort of maybe perhaps unintended consequence of that strategy of the 4-alarm fire strategy of communications. Motivating for some, but maybe demotivating potentially for others.
Yeah, this is kind of an issue. And again, it brings us back to communication. What we're talking about in that particular book is a particular narrative, apocalyptic narrative. Things are really bad. This is how bad it is. And people resonate with that because comes from the Bible. It comes from, we're attuned to that storyline. But again, this is where the creativity comes in. You want to know what kind of story you're telling to people. You want to maybe put a positive spin on it, at least. We still have time to do this, to change things.
And I would jump in. Yeah, I would jump in, Nate. I mean, my sense, I think it was probably like 10 years ago, there was a whole bunch of people at the national level who were trying to figure out how how do you mobilize people to think about this? You know, because unlike most things, climate's invisible. You know, like now that we're having storms and things, I think people are paying attention more because you can see the effects of a hurricane, or you can see the effects of a drought, where before it started getting bad, there were no effects. It was coming. So I think there's been a long struggle to figure out how to address it, and people would go to the worst case. My personal sense is that the framing is feeling disempowered and hopeless versus feeling like you have some control. And so, like, I guess, so this is not a book, but I'll tell you, so I don't know if you guys, I used to work for Greenpeace. So I helped coordinate the protests at the first UN climate conference in New York in '92. So I've been thinking about climate for a long time. And for years and years, I'd sort of like be pushing. And the thing that actually flipped things for me is watching the Al Gore movie, because then I think with that movie, more people got aware of it. Not a lot, but more. It was a mainstream communication. And so I felt like I didn't have to push as much. Like there was just more general sense like that. So that was a milestone for me. But I think where I'm at now is I'm pretty pessimistic. I mean, just because our policymakers have their head up their ass, and no one can agree. But the work of this committee and of people doing stuff, it's about taking control of your life. And people don't want to feel powerless in their lives. I mean, no one does around anything. And so if we can offer opportunities for people to take control, then I was just reading, Henry, you might know about this book. I can't remember the name of it. I just got it out of the library. It's about hope in a screwed up world. It's a little book, but that hope is about looking forward. And so taking concrete actions and doing things to take control of your life builds hope, as opposed to, it's all bigger than me and I can't do anything, and the politicians aren't deciding, and the world's going to go into this descending spiral of heating. Then you're like, there's nothing I can do. So part of my thought is like, there's things we can do. Maybe it'll make a difference in the end. It won't, but we should be trying. And so if we can lay out a plan for action that's manageable, tangible, people scaled, whether it's aggregation or, having a farmer's market, and everything in between. So Graham.
Yeah, up until a few months ago, I was figuring, well, even though to decarbonize what we have, I would hold my nose and figure, okay, I think I might have said 1% of Shutesbury would cover, a little more than 1% would cover our needs. But I read a book a couple of months ago now, Climate by Charles Eisenstein. Spells like it sounds, right? Eisenstein. And he made the point, and many have made it. Greenpeace probably has made it too, that we can't just keep on with our growth economy and consume the planet, because that way we're wrecking the planet, whether or not we boil off all the all the water and cook ourselves with the temperature. So anyhow, he looks at how there's structural things in our culture, in our Western culture, that could be changed. There's plenty of societies that have done better than us. What have we got? 300 years down the road of industrialization, and we're in and with our model, the planet gets wrecked. So he suggests very compellingly that there are other cultural sets of values that we can adopt. We don't have to we don't have to just spiral on this growth until we burn ourselves up. So I recommend the book because it's a little also uplifting and more hopeful. The other thing I'd say to it is that I don't think scaring people. I mean, we can paint scenarios of of gloom and doom, and as Henry said, the Jeremiads. I mean, humanity has had stuff scaring them for a long time, and it's not. I don't think it's a very it's not a great model for how to get to the next thing. And the next thing is coming. So, it's just trying to work out which part of the next thing is going to be sustainable.
So yeah, I would say, yeah, in terms of framing for each communication act that you want to enact, framing it would obviously require that you think about what kind of storylines are underlying it or very upfront. What kinds of metaphors? So instead of, because we can't see climate change, for instance, talk about it as I mentioned in my little blurb there, it's like a blanket of gases that are warming the climate, warming the planet. And that is that, so it's a very tangible thing, a blanket. Everybody knows what a heat blanket would be like. Or another metaphor is we are frogs sitting, in a pot that's got water that heats up very gradually. And before we know it, it's beyond our ability to get out of the pot. As a metaphor for what's going on, right? Because people are not responding. At some point, in a kind of exponential way, it becomes increasingly more difficult to reverse or mitigate climate change.
Yeah.
But
I think
all those things, just thinking in terms of kinds of metaphors, stories, words that we use to describe things, all those things make a difference.
I think the first practical opportunity is going to be around the community choice aggregation. So if we do the public education sessions and we do sort of these public hearings about the buckets of options, we're going to be engaging the town. And the underlying question is, why are you doing it? And people are going to be bringing their thoughts and opinions and feelings to that. So whether it's skepticism or enthusiasm and and the continuum across that. So, I mean, I think this is a helpful conversation because as we, I think, Henry, tell me if I'm wrong, but, has been a tendency to say, well, just tell people the facts, but the facts don't compel. And so if we do an FAQ about why community choice aggregation is important, that there's some facts that matter, like, this is how it works facts, like, this is the process. Those are relevant, but in terms of making an argument for why the town would want to adopt this or go down this road, I think that's the challenge of us communicating it, because on the one hand, some people will be very enthusiastic and other people are going to be skeptical. And it's both of those groups comprise the town and they have to be engaged. And, ultimately, there's a vote, so there might be a majority and a minority, but our goal and our intent should be bringing as many people along as possible. So, yeah.
I think one of the things there is, and you talk about future, Graham, is talk about consequences and imagining consequences for what seems like a great idea now. Well, plot out what might happen or might not happen beyond what the immediate looks like. So the consequences for, could be good, the pluses and the minuses for anything that you're looking at in terms of a plan. What are the consequences? And are they in the long run beneficial to the culture, to the planet, to a larger picture than your own backyard?
Leslie?
I love Charles Eisenstadt, and I'm really glad that you brought him up. There's lots of YouTubes to watch of him speaking. He's adorable and very philosophical, so he really draws you in terms of what Henry's saying as a, the way that you speak about something. in terms of books, when I was building my home back in the, I guess, 86, 87, I think in the early 90s, I wrote a book before all the natural home books came out and sold it to the NACL Center on building a natural home and building materials down to paints and stains and also my first cookbook has a section all on all the pesticides, insecticides, herbicides that are on every different vegetable and fruit. So when Zoe was looking for books, you could check out The Quick and Easy Organic Gourmet. But I think, you know, what I've always done when I'm teaching is try to make it fun, try to make it delicious so that, and also show people that it doesn't cost more money. So a lot of people are looking at the bottom line of like, oh, it's going to cost me more money to eat organic food. Well, it really is cheaper if you join a CSA, which I know many of us know about. So I think that kind of practical information where people get to hear about everyday things that they could do when they shop, where they shop, how they get their stuff. Is it delivered? You know, what, you know, the common sense stuff so people can look at their own footprint and carbon footprint and lessen it without changing, without making their lifestyle less pleasurable. That's how I've made my living, show how yummy and delicious it could be to lessen your carbon footprint. So, yeah.
Any other thoughts on this? I think my sense is we're going to be coming up against how to communicate this stuff soon. So, you know, ruminating on, you know, and Henry, it's great to have you as a resource if we're developing stuff, maybe as a set of eyes or, but Gail?
And Henry, thank you for the short version that you handed out, and with the little boxes for us to check on in terms of our thinking. You know, who's our audience? What do we want to speak? How do we speak to them? And bringing those questions that are not necessarily first in mind when you want to tell somebody a story.
Yeah, and I think, you know, critically, I think is identifying opinion leaders, if they exist. I'm sure they exist in this town. Influencers in this town. That's typically one important component. You know, you can send all kinds of messages, but if you work on the influencers, that along with mass messaging, that's usually a recipe for success. You know, mass messaging alone is just not very, you know, it tends not to be as effective as having something that coordinates with people on the ground, influencers, people who are opinion leaders.
What, you know, Henry, not to extend this too much longer, but what you said just is, it's interesting thinking about this communications in a small town setting, because everything's so close, you know, up close and personal. And so a lot of messaging is, it's the messenger, and who's the trusted messenger.
Yeah.
You know, so if you've got someone who's fiscally conservative saying, raising their hand and saying, I'm good with this, you know, I've looked at it financially and I'm good with it. And then someone else says, I'm the environmentalist and I've looked at this and I'm good with it from that perspective. That those are the people, you know, and we've seen it at town meetings, it happens all the time. You know, and it also has the negative effects because someone might look and say, oh, so-and-so is speaking up for this. So I think it plays out, you know, and that we do have a sense of who's on some of these topics, you know, who are the voices. And it might be reaching out to folks, like you're saying, and just sort of having conversations.
You know, making a good case to those people.
Yeah.
A proposal they can't refuse.
Yeah. Graham.
I would ask Zoe. You're a good example of a person who's you know, walking the talk. What has inspired you to do you know, your alternative of agriculture?
Yeah, I was hugely influenced by a farmer in Gill, Danny Botkin. And I would go to his farm every week. And like Leslie was saying, it was about the kind of pleasurable experiences with this lifestyle. So just the incredible tastes from his garden and trying a pawpaw for the first time, and just like being connected to animals and how adorable they are, and just kind of playing on our body's own natural tendency to move towards healthful things when they're, or to enjoy healthful things when they're presented to us, and giving people opportunities to understand that. Like, it would be awesome if like Trump could just come to our farm and like live for a while and eat goat cheese, and I don't know, like we've my mom and I have talked about that, like as a fantasy, just like what would happen if he could just enjoy himself on a farm. So that was the most influential thing for me in choosing this lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think you've hit a really important point, and that is that you found something that you enjoyed. There's so much in our culture that people are unhappy about. What do they say? 20% are on antidepressants. Others are drinking themselves to death. This would be something that Charles Eisenstein touches on, that we have a money system that totally makes everyone never have enough. I mean, what a sad cultural sort of a tool, money is, in the way we use it, because the rich people never have enough and the poor people certainly don't have enough. So that's the sort of rethinking that I think, that you've already done, Zoe, in choosing what you're doing. More people need to do that. So.
Cool. Well said, Graham. So I'm going to wrap us up. Henry, thank you for sharing both the expertise and the material, and for prompting the conversation. And maybe we will, circle round as we get closer to actually doing stuff and check in. But Zoe, great question. Thanks for asking that question. That was really helpful. So just in the interest of time, we're at 8:31. So do I have a motion to adjourn? Graham, second. Leslie, okay. And I do know there was one thing on a funding review, but we'll blow it off and do it another time, because unless Gail, is there anything? There's nothing pressing, right? Okay. So we'll vote ourselves out. Nate?
Aye.
Zoe?
Aye.
Graham?
Aye.
Leslie?
Aye.
Gail?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. Okay, we're officially adjourned. Have a wonderful evening, and see you in 3 weeks. I forget the date, but later in August.
Oh, yeah, get better there,
Take
Mike.
care and get well.
I will. Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. I think it's the 23rd.
Okay, thank you, Leslie.
Or, yeah.